Awesome.
All right, so there we go. I am going to give the intro because we haven't made one yet, but welcome back to the PED podcast, Performance and Education and Discussion, because we don't believe in Oxford commas here, nor real acronyms, but this shit is all done on the fly. We basically had to cut our conversation leading into this podcast because we're just spitballing about what we want to talk about, and we don't want to talk too much about it because every host on this podcast will just fucking talk if we are not monitored. But the last episode, we went into a really, really great detail, great discussion about blood work, women and performance enhancement, and basically just anything. Like the reception on it was super, super awesome. And I'm glad if you guys are tuning in for the second episode, you think we are important enough to devote a little chunk of your day to listen to us. But we basically decided we were going to do it once a month, but because of the reception, we're going to do this, let's say weekly for right now. We might reassess later, but we're going to do basically long Esther and short Esther episodes. The short Esther episodes being like 30 minutes long. The longer ones we're going to go more in depth and actually discuss and research coming into it, so we can actually have some really, really good stuff going. But Dave, Jake, how are you guys doing? What's up?
Fantastic. Great, doing great.
Yes.
Yeah, you interrupted a really good conversation. I will say that.
I know right. that's the problem. Like, we need to have this conversation.
We just need to push record. Like, as soon as we log on, we just need to push record, and then we can cut out whatever we don't want.
Yeah, but yeah. So basically, we were actually, because on the previous episode we talked about how important blood work is, how important blood work was, or not was, but it always is. But it's important to get a sense of what is going on in your body, what the compounds you are putting into you are doing inside of you. And even if you are a natural athlete, understand what is happening in your body, how to optimize the different systems or things in your own system, the body, to basically put you in the best situation to make that progress that you want to make. So yeah, but the thing we were talking about is how blood work isn't really it's not the end all be all, and it's all context based. So Jake and David, like, you pick up where you left off, because we were talking about how for my particular blood work, when I got it done and I posted it, and I'll post it again for this, but it was after a moderately heavy cycle going into the showdown meet. I was on orals, but coming out of it, my liver enzymes were slightly elevated. I had people telling me, like, holy shit, you need to fucking triple, quadruple dose your Tutka right now. You're going to fucking die, bro. That aren't as educated or informed or understand what might be happening when you're training hard, and how that actual training, not just the supplementation, can reflect on a person's blood work.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those things where, for one, you have to always put it into context of the environment that's happening to your body. So most people were like, your liver enzymes are really elevated, you took a lot of orals, or holy crap, you need to like do something about it. Well, maybe you don't need to do anything about it. Maybe the reason why, like, expecting to perform at a high level, or to take drugs for that matter, and not have blood markers go out of range is delusional. Drugs involved or not, because in order to see a high performance outcome, what are we always talking about? We're talking about a peak. A peak means that you forced your body completely out of its comfort zone, something that it cannot achieve for sustained periods of time. That means that you are disrupting your biological being to some extent. If you are not, then I would say you kind of missed the mark of the whole thing that we're doing. Like, if your blood work is not disrupted, you probably could have trained a lot harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, we're talking about ALT, SAT. Well, this is what we were talking about, is ALT and SAT. Your liver enzymes, well, some of the liver enzymes, and these can be elevated just from hard training. And we were just talking, hopefully I'm not like giving out information here, but we too much information here,
It
David.
doesn't
But
matter.
his
Yeah.
liver enzymes were elevated. He's not taking orals. His liver, you know, and it kind of freaked him out. They were in like the 200s, 300 range, which most people see that and they're like, whoa, holy crap, what is going on? And with Joe too, you know, I think yours were in the hundreds, Joe, like 100. People see that, they're like, oh my gosh, we got to get on some TUDCA, got to get on some liver support. But it has that doesn't mean that your liver's like gone, right? It doesn't mean it's all messed up. And so David went and got another test and tested the GGT, which I don't know if you want to talk about GGT at all.
Yeah, we can.
But yeah, it's his came back perfectly healthy, completely normal liver function. And it can be the same thing with all your other numbers too. Like sometimes your testosterone will be low just because you're going through really neurological training. You're learning a lot. You need new synapses. You need more, you know, works on your spinal cord so much and whatnot. So the point is, blood work, it is not like end all be all. It doesn't indicate good health or bad health all the time. It's all context.
Exactly. And another important thing to take into consideration here is blood work, those ranges, okay? So you have ranges, okay, for your blood work. Those are for normal people, not that are sitting on their butt or just doing their 9-to-5 jobs and eating their normal food, and generally not stressed from and on purpose, okay? Athletes are the exact opposite of that, okay? And I'm not the first person, this isn't new stuff. Like if you just sit down and think critically, okay, so if I'm an athlete and I'm already an outlier in body weight, I'm an outlier in strength, I'm an outlier in how much food I eat, you should expect some of your blood work to be outliers. Now, there are crucial pieces of blood work that you don't want to be outliers. Those are the things we touched on the last episode, like your hematocrit, your red blood cells, things that will kill you right this second. But there are other things that you do want out of range. For example, let's just say that you're a strong man, okay? And you are a very glycolytic athlete and you need a lot of ability to transport oxygen, the muscles that are working, but you can't breathe that much. You're not going to breathe with 1,000-pound yoke on you, okay? And at least not very well. So you are relying on your blood's oxygen carrying capacity. At that point in time, what would I be wanting? I would be wanting to take PEDs that actually bring up my hemoglobin and hematocrit. Now, we would want to actually monitor that. We don't want them so high that we cause a stroke, but we want them higher. We want them out of range slightly so that we can carry more oxygen for the thing that we're going to be doing. If we didn't do that, we'd be leaving performance on the table. We just wouldn't be getting as much performance as we could out of some of the drugs that we could leverage. Another thing that comes to mind in that aspect, as far as like blood work that I would like to see out of range, is your AST and ALT, like we talked about. If a client comes to me and they're in the middle of a powerlifting peak, which is very damaging, you see what I mean? Like compared
Yes.
to a bodybuilder, okay? A powerlifter's peak is literally going to be damaging mechanically, way more than a bodybuilder. They're going to see AST and ALT elevated. They should be elevated. But their GGT, the actual enzymes related to liver function, the actual liver's ability, or the actual liver tissue itself, that should be normal as long as they're not taking, large amounts of orals or consuming alcohol on the side or whatever. But a very good dosed athlete that's training very hard, I would expect AST and ALT to be close to 100 or somewhere slightly above or slightly below, and their GGT in the 20s or so, or a little bit under that. If that same athlete told me they're taking all these drugs and they're seeing very poor progress, and they tell me that they're training like an animal, but I see AST and ALT are like in their 20s, perfectly normal, I would suspect one of two things. They're either not training as hard as they say they're training, or their drugs are fake.
Yeah.
Or their drugs are fake, as in they can't push themselves to train to the level of damaging tissue all the time and still survive. That's the whole point in taking PEDs. PEDs, in my opinion, are not there to signal muscle growth at the elite level. We're talking about athletes like us that are at the upper end of even the athletes that we're competing against. The reason we're taking it is so that we can survive our training. Not you see what I'm saying?
Yep. And that kind of leads into kind of what I wanted to touch on, because with the strongman who needs more oxygen to be carried by his blood, we want the hematocrit and hemoglobin to be elevated. With the power lifter who is going through, like I said about myself before we were recording, there were 4 to 5 to 6 weeks where I was squatting above 775 pounds for multiple reps, multiple sets every single week. That is damaging to my tissue, to my body. It's obviously going to be reflected in my blood work. But like you said earlier at the start of this entire conversation, David, we're setting it up for a peak. We're doing this for a purpose, and going back to like exercise science and that thought process, what is the SAID principle? It's specific adaptations to impose demands. These are specific adaptations we can see in our blood work due to the demands that we're placing on ourselves. The blood work ranges, they're designed for the normal individual, the typical average human. I don't know about you guys. Well, I do know about you guys, but I don't know about any of you listeners, but I am not trying to be the typical average human. I am trying to be the outlier. I am trying to be the exception, not the rule. So when I approach my training in that manner, when I live my life in that manner, and when I take these supplements, these drugs in that manner to not just signal hypertrophy or make me look a little bit better, but literally to survive the demands that I'm placing on myself, what else would I expect when I check my health? If I went into getting blood work after the showdown and I'm like, all right, let's see what's fucked up. I wasn't going into it and being like, all right, yeah, I'm good. This is just a normal checkup. I'm gonna be totally cool. Jake is my coach. Jake handles all of this shit for me. I told him, I'm like, well, we'll fucking see, dude. I don't know, because if you go into it and like if you train hard as you need to achieve the things that you need to, you take the supplements and the drugs that you need to survive that very same training, and then you achieve what you set out to achieve, your body isn't in a normal, like just chilling, just having a good time. Your body is probably going to be like, yo, dude, this is why you need to take some fucking time off after a competition and chill the fuck out. It's why you can't run, or you shouldn't run. I know people do, but why you shouldn't run heavy doses of androgens or train super hard relative, whatever that means, year round.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like a lot of times you need to look for blood work for good function, right? Like, and I know David can cover this better because you're just a lot better at blood work than I am. But like, for example, like with the liver, you're talking about ALT, SAT, they can be high, but you see the GGT and that comes back clear. Another one to look at is like your BUN, your creatinine can be high, but your ratio is actually a little bit more important. And that can signal really good kidney function, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're almost like, when you're taking that blood work, you need to push yourself into an uncomfortable zone to be able to adapt, or there's nothing for your body to adapt to, right? Like your body isn't going to just be like, okay, I squat 800 pounds now. Like you need to force your body to do that. But we want to make sure everything is functioning right. And so maybe, David, I don't know if you have any other things you like, little things to look at like that, but I know like BUN creatinine ratio is a really good one to look at for good kidney. And like we're talking GGT for the liver. I don't know if there's anything else that you can think of like that.
So there are a few things. So, Joe mentioned, whether you're taking drugs for performance, strength, or whatever, or just to look good. So another thing, a lot of people that might be listening to this might also be physique athletes, and they take drugs that make them lose body fat. Well, another marker that is in there that might freak some people out, but is actually a good thing, is triglycerides. Okay. So
that's a great one.
If you're taking a bunch of drugs that release body fat so that you can burn it, or even not even to that point, like growth hormone, like multiple forms of athletes take growth hormone. Okay, growth hormone inadvertently directly releases triglycerides. Okay, high triglycerides in the blood mean one thing: you are actively releasing body fat from your fat into the blood. If it's really high, that means you're not doing a good enough job at burning them. So if you're a physique athlete, well, you better be on your feet a lot more if you get blood work that shows really high elevated triglycerides. Triglycerides also interfere and are probably more of the root cause of diabetes, type 2 diabetes. So if you, like most people are talking about, like growth hormone causes can make you type 2 diabetic or et cetera, all that. Well, it does it from the way of, when you inject growth hormone directly, the very first thing that it does is releases triglycerides into the blood. And, and if you aren't damaging your body so that those triglycerides can be used as fuel for recovery of those tissues, or if you're not active enough to use those triglycerides, all you're doing is pushing a bunch of triglycerides into your blood for no reason, and they're going through and registering, because your body takes account of everything that's going on, and registering, oh, this guy's got high triglycerides, and he's having high triglycerides all the time. We probably need to start implementing some feedback loops to make it so this guy stops eating so damn much, because your body doesn't your body doesn't know that you injected a bunch of growth hormone. All it registers is triglycerides, and it goes, fuck, this guy needs to stop eating. So we start making ourselves type 2 diabetic as a mechanism against getting too fucking fat. You see what I mean? Type 2 diabetes is not a thing that randomly happens. It's a thing that your body implements as a precautionary measure so that you don't eat yourself into fatness, like a abnormal amount. So it's making you insulin resistant so that you stop storing shit. The triglycerides are a telltale sign that your drugs are working and that they are working well. And now your job comes into, let's burn them or take a different drug. I'm not going to get into that. Take a different drug that will burn them for you.
Yes. Yeah. Another example of that is actually. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, go, Jay.
Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say, just to add on that, like another example of a drug that can spike your triglycerides is actually taking T4 or thyroid medication in general. I've seen a couple people where they're like, my triglycerides are elevated, and my doctor doesn't know why. And it's like, well, you're also on this thyroid, and that will absolutely spike your triglycerides as well. You can use that to benefit you, right? Like in the case where you want to have triglycerides high maybe during the evening, so you have energy to run off of when there's a lot of damage and whatnot. But that is something to be aware of. Is some of these drugs are going to elevate things that are known as bad things, and they're not actually a bad thing. There are times where you do want your triglycerides to be a little bit elevated, especially if you have good aerobic capacity. You can use them very efficiently.
That's right.
And okay, and that's why I wanted you to go, because I wanted to build off of that thought, because we in some context, just like with blood work, it all depends on context. With having slightly elevated triglycerides, like, you want them to be slightly elevated at certain points, but you just don't want to go incredibly high. And in practical application, because I know there's a lot of people listening that are like, okay, this is all well and good, but like, what the fuck do I do with it? In practical application of this is why the fat power lifter is going extinct. The person who has the big gut and doesn't actually look like they do shit, but then shows up to the meet and does well, that person has dog shit totals compared to what is actually happening now, because people are approaching or should be approaching, or the people at the top are approaching their training as if they are athletes and actually developing some level of aerobic capacity, because it helps deal with stress in the body. It helps manage the triglycerides, and it helps you use everything that you're taking in better. And this is why me, like in my own practical application, this is why I walk so much. I've talked about it before, but I have ADHD. I'm a very all over the place person. I'm spastic, if you will, but it helps me manage my own energy. And it also helps me manage this by simply, I walk on the treadmill a lot. I go on a lot of walks. I'm moving very frequently just because it's an easy thing to do that is also beneficial to my health. And a lot of people, in my opinion, would do a lot better in general, both in terms of their own health and their own training, if they just simply bought a pedometer, one of those step counters, and just basically were like, okay, I'm going to get a baseline of 8,000 a day, 10,000 a day. There's that old saying of like 10,000 steps a day or whatever, but it's basically just as long as they have some baseline and they hit that baseline every goddamn day, or as much as they frequently can, and just don't be sedentary. Like, treat yourself as if you are not just a strength athlete, but you are an athlete as a whole. If you consider yourself an athlete, you shouldn't get out of breath walking up the stairs in your house, or like walking through the mall. You shouldn't like begrudgingly go with your girlfriend shopping because like you barely can make it through it. You should just not want to go because it's boring as fuck.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And then another thing to touch on just a little bit, following the triglyceride example and like practical application, everybody's like, oh, if I run growth hormone, how much is too much? And this is a place where your blood work can tell you that exactly. So you take your baseline blood work and you look at your triglycerides when you're not taking any growth hormone and you're in your normal activity wise. So you're not preparing for anything special. You're just in your normal activity wise. Then you take your blood work with growth hormone, whatever that dose you chose to be, and you see if your triglycerides are elevated above 150. If they're elevated above 150, that means two things. Your growth hormone is too much for your current activity level, and you can start to run into insulin sensitivity down the road. Or you can increase your steps, increase your activity to bring down that triglyceride load. And now you can run this level of growth hormone with this level of activity and be perfectly fine. Now, some people, that amount of growth hormone can be like 3 or 4 units. And for some people, that amount of growth hormone will be 1 or 2. But again, I can't tell you that without knowing all the things that you're doing day-to-day life and with your blood work. Again, bringing context to the blood work.
Yeah, and this is why. Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Go.
No, okay, sorry. I think I have a little lag. I don't know what the fuck is going on, but I don't know. But two things from that. That's why that, like, last podcast we talked about basically getting more out of what we're putting into the equation. We want to get the most out of the drugs we're taking, the food we're eating, the training that we're doing. So if you are running into insulin sensitivity when you're taking this amount of growth hormone, it's like, oh, well, okay, I can scale this back, or I can be a little bit less of a bitch and take a little bit more accountability on myself and just stand the fuck up and go do my shit sometimes. Like, go walk, go do this, go blah, 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 you also need to understand that it's not just about, okay, well, I have to take this or add this or lower this or increase this. Sometimes it's just about, okay, I need to take it upon myself, because if this is a priority to me, this training, this goal, this whatever, then I need to act as such. I need to get up and move. I need to do this. I need to do that. And that's why this is context based, because you won't ever know the trends in your own body unless it's not just about getting blood work done once, like I did after the showdown. It's about getting blood work done consistently for years, regularly, and understanding what is happening in your own body, your own environment, and what basically plays into that and how you can work with it, rather than just being like, oh, I got it once, I'm healthy. You need to get it consistently and understand that as your training changes, as your drugs change, as your age changes will come along in your blood work too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what I was going to add into there, is just that this is why it can be really important to, if you're going to run drugs and if you want to make the most of it, to get a coach that is competent enough to know the signs and the symptoms of things where you're going too far, right? And so, like, if you're pushing it too far, your coach doesn't even need necessarily to see your blood work. He can tell by the way you're sleeping, your appetite, your sometimes just like your libido, your energy, whatever. In combination with your blood work, you can make these adaptations really quickly too, instead of waiting, 2-3 months to get your blood work again, and then you're actually in trouble. So this is where, somebody might go and hire a coach just to help them, pull together their training, their diet, and their drug use all together. So, you can be healthy and find these things before they even get there, because blood work's only going to tell you so much. If you're not, used to reading it, you can think you're healthy when you're not, or think you're not healthy when you really are.
Absolutely. And to put a little bit more context to both of you, for one, if you're running into an issue, it's not always, just like Joe said, it's not always, let's add this other drug that does something else. A perfect example is you run into growth hormone and you're getting a little bit of insulin sensitivity. So people will throw in something like metformin or insulin, which is even worse, in my opinion, in that particular scenario. So they're getting poor insulin sensitivity. They'll add in insulin that takes care of their blood glucose, but it didn't take care of the triglycerides. So what ends up happening is all you've done is made this deficit potentially even deeper, because it will come back because you haven't gotten rid of the original cause, which was the triglycerides, which is only done by the activity, you see, or, I'll just say it doesn't matter, or DNP. That doesn't mean that everybody should run DNP if they have high triglycerides, because that shit can kill you if you don't know what the hell you're doing with it. So that one, you should definitely hire a coach or somebody who's dealt with it personally before you just start popping it back.
And that stuff's faked.
Extra dead, extra super extra dead, fast.
That's the problem. It's the only one that can kill you, like today, irreversibly, if you accidentally do something wrong. Like, it's like, oh fuck, I fucked up. Oh well, no, it's, oh fuck, I fucked up, I'm gonna die now.
Yeah, it's the one compound where, like, I don't know about you guys, but I went throughout my existence in doing all of this dumb shit. I've done a lot of dumb shit. There have been meat days where I'm like, oh, how much Anadrol can I take before I feel like I'm going to vomit, and it's like, and then you're like, I don't even want to fucking do the total count, but it's like, okay, that's really stupid. It's really dumb, but it's basically the equivalent of, like, not the equivalent, but it's like, it's not going to immediately kill you. Doing that with DNP is like, just basically,
you will die.
it's the fentanyl of steroids. You need, like, the exact right amount or you're fucking dead.
Yeah. So again, that's why I didn't want to say it, but I mean, it's fine. We're all adults here, and all of this is speculation for everybody.
Yes.
But yeah, so it's one of those things where, like you said, it's not just about adding in. Like, sometimes you don't want to add in or need to add in another drug. The simple fix is just be more fucking active, be more aerobically, have more aerobic capacity, so that these issues that you might run into don't even happen, and you can take the drugs that you need and you're perfectly fine and realize all the benefits. And then to what Jake was saying, as far as like having a coach that doesn't necessarily need blood work, like to tell if something's wrong or off at that point in time, that comes back to following trends. A coach that can do that is usually a coach that has had 1 or 2 blood works from you already, has been working with you consistently with what you're eating and what you're doing day in and day out for at least a few months. And then all of a sudden you come up with, hey, all of a sudden I'm getting some nosebleeds and I'm feeling like I'm underwater a little bit. And then he goes back into the previous blood work that it might have been taken back 3 months ago and goes, oh, you know what, your hematocrit was borderline, and what we've done is we've implemented testosterone, but we've also added in anadrol. Oh fuck, okay, we're probably looking at a hematocrit issue, and we probably just need to go get a little bit of, go donate some blood. So you have the guy go donate some blood. He messaged you back a week later and he goes, dude, that fixed everything. No more nosebleeds. I feel like I have a ton of energy, and I don't feel like I'm underwater anymore. You see what I mean? Like, the coach isn't a guru and just all of a sudden you tell him some symptoms and he knows what's wrong with you. The coach knows what's wrong with you, or has a very good suspicion of what may be happening, because he knows the drugs you're taking, because he knows the training that you're doing, and because he knows your previous blood work, even if it wasn't very very new. Yeah, you're good.
Oh, weird. It must be my computer. I don't know. My shit is freezing. But yes, it's trends. Like, and it's the same. It's understanding like what effect some of the additions may make and how that may affect the things that we already know about. And you can apply that to anything. It's drugs, it's training. If somebody tells me or any of you guys like, oh, my knee's killing me, and then like every time I like lift my knee to my knee hurts, I have like knee tendonitis, there's some weird inflammation going on and it's painful, and then oh man, like when I pull my knee to my chest, I'm like sitting and I lift this up, it's like really tight and it just feels like really painful. And then when I if I roll my quad, it doesn't really help, but I roll really like high on my hip and like up near like my pelvis in that part of my quad, it's really, really tender. And it's like, okay, your rectus femoris, because that's the only quad muscle that crosses the hip and crosses the knee. That's probably the one that is your issue, because if the knee hurts and then up near the hip is like tight or impinged or feels fucking weird or stuff going on, it's basically like it's like math proofs. It's like if this,
Yes.
then this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's all this is. Like, again, I'm not trying to make it sound like coaches are like this machine that you tell them some information and they spit out the right answer, because it's almost never like that. But a good coach is somebody who can run down all these different options and come up with a very concise place to start looking time after time.
Yeah, and just takes your feedback and tries to do something about it too. Like if your coach is prescribing you drugs or telling you how to use drugs, but he's not asking for feedback and whatnot, it's probably a red flag there.
I am resisting my own urge to basically go on a rant about coaching, because like I am always more than capable to do that. But it's basically like, if I'm not going to say every coach should ask for blood work, or every coach, like if your coach isn't asking for your blood work, he's a piece of shit, whatever. That's not always the case. But if your coach is making recommendations on exogenous hormones being put in your body, and then he's not asking for blood work, or he or she is not asking for blood work, or trying to like see trends or work off of a larger plan, then I'm going to go out on a limb and say that person is probably using a bit more just anecdotal evidence and educated guessing, or less than educated guessing, than they probably should.
I would agree with that, especially if this coach is new to you. If this coach is new to you and you can't like you've never really interacted with them, other than he gave you some recommendations, and then like 3 months later, he still hasn't asked anything about your drug protocol or how it's affected you. And you tell him like, here's a clear red flag. Hey, when should I get some blood work? Because you know that you should probably get some. And he goes, I don't know, whenever you want, I guess. Then at that point in time, I would say, okay, I need to figure out something different, because I have an answer for that for everybody. And it is different for everybody, because it depends on how long they've been taking something. What have they been taking? Like maybe, if they ask if they've been, we just introduced somebody brand new or something, and they're taking, 200 or 300 milligrams of testosterone. I'm not going to ask them to get blood work for like 4 months, because 200 or 300 milligrams isn't even going to manifest any real outcome when it comes to blood work for 3 or 4 months, especially if when they came to me, they gave me some initial blood work. Like, I'm not even going to worry about it. But if that same person was an experienced lifter and he goes, hey, we're going to ramp up to 1 gram of gear and we're going to run that for about 8 weeks in a hypertrophy phase, then I'm going to be like, hey, at the end of that hypertrophy phase, we want to schedule some blood work. Or right when you get to your max dosage, right when you start your hypertrophy phase, we want to see what your health is at that point in time, because maybe we can run that hypertrophy phase for 10 or 12 weeks if you're extra healthy instead of just 8.
Right. And I do want to add in that this does come back on the athlete as well. If you need to be a little bit proactive as well, because I don't want to throw every coach under the bus and say they should be texting you every week and asking you for all these lists of questions and whatever. Like if you're getting a symptom or you're getting something that you're worried about, or you're just like, you be proactive and ask your coach too, hey, I'm getting a little bit of this. Is this normal? Is this okay? What do you think? Blah, blah, blah. Because your coach can't read your mind too, right? He can't just tell you like, oh, you're probably getting this now, right? Like you can't know that. Like with David, how many times do I talk to you throughout the week? Like at least 3 or 4
like every other day,
times
every day, yeah, something like that.
and I'm like, I'm giving him, oh, this is how this is going, this is how this is going, and all of a sudden we'll see like a little bit of a trend, and it's like, oh, it might be this. Let's see if it keeps going, and maybe we'll need to take this out or throw this in, or maybe you need to, do that, whatever. So it is a two-sided thing. Like you should be giving good feedback. You should be asking good questions on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't agree with that the most, especially when your coach is a coach that's not just coaching you. You know what I mean? Like there isn't too many people that have a good coach and that coach is only coaching them. Like they might be a high-end athlete at that point. But
you're talking an NFL player or something.
Yeah. But most of us are going to have a coach that has at least, a few people, and it's your job to give as much feedback as you can, and never, ever, ever think that you're bugging the coach. Because a good coach is never going to be bugged about good feedback. Like, don't expect to get an answer back within a minute or two, or even that same day. But expect your coach to be like, hey, the next check-in, let's talk about your feedback. I have some follow-up questions or something along those lines. There should be a conversation that happens there when you do give them some feedback. And that for sure lies on, how much do you want to get out of your training or your coaching? Like you're paying the guy, how the amount of positivity that you get out of that is how much you interact with your coach. Trust me, none of us are here because we don't like interacting with people.
Right.
No, so yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Not that I've had too many clients like that. I've had 1 or 2, but those are usually the ones that they don't get the results they want and whatever, and then you try to explain to them, well, why didn't we get that? And then they're like, well, this was happening, but I couldn't really, I never told you about it. And I'm like, well, you didn't tell me.
I can't do anything about it. Right. Yeah. And that's something that should be kind of established up front when you decide on, how much you're paying the person or whatever, because like if you're paying the guy like not very much, you can't expect him to cover everything, right? Too. So that's something that should be established. Like, hey, I'm going to pay you for programming, or I'm going to pay you for programming, but I also want to pay you to help me run a drug protocol and whatnot. So that all that should be established up front. If it's not, maybe that's something you should talk to your coach or client about is, this is what is expected.
Yeah. Everything. Yeah. Again, we're a little bit off now on the blood work from
that's my fault.
No, that's fine. I mean, the coach client relationship and stuff like that. But again, this is just as important as really anything else that we do here. There isn't, there's the recreational users, and then there's the users that actually compete. They're most likely going to have coaches. And, this is something that, drugs are already going to be consuming some money. Coaches are going to be consuming some money. You need to get the most out of both of them. We've kind of gone through things about how to get the most out of your drugs. Now, the next step is how do you get the most out of your coach? And that's by being proactive with your communication with your coach.
Just like the relationship with your wife or your husband, like communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 1,000%. And that's kind of like to David's point. Like I have a good sized coaching roster, and the thing that basically like grinds my gears, or not irritates me, but I hate hearing it from clients, is when someone tells me like, oh, I didn't want to bother you. And I'm like, that's literally what you're paying me for. Like, you're not bothering me. If I put out a statement on like Instagram, or I shoot everybody an email and I'm like, yo, I'm going to be away from the keyboard. I'm going to be like off for like 3 days because I'm in Hawaii or something. Then obviously don't fucking bother me. but like it's, if you are a paying customer to me, you're paying me for a service. Part of that service is access to me. So even if I don't get back to you for like 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever, it just depends on like client load and everything that's going on. And that's established as we get into it. But don't think that you're bothering your coach, because that's literally what you're paying them to do. And then to that point, if you have a coach where they say like, hey, you're bothering me, or they act like you're a burden, or they hate giving you the service that you're paying for, fuck that fucking coach. This is a customer, everything here and everything in any industry, it's all customer service based. So if you are not getting the an adequate service that you've paid money for, that you've exchanged money has exchanged hands for, then leave. You have no obligation to it. I would tell clients that of my own, like, if you don't like how we're doing things, I'm never going to take it personally if you go work with somebody else. And if your coach does, fuck them. They should find a different goddamn industry to be in.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree with that more, especially once you actually are a coach and client. The only thing that hiccups me a little bit with that is like people that just randomly ask questions. That's a whole different rant.
No, yeah.
On that note, it's like, well, I mean, I do this for a living, so here's my contact.
Everybody.
Yeah, here's my contact information, and here are my prices. And then at that point, I do ignore them. But again, that's because they haven't paid that to cross that threshold. I mean, I'm just like Joe. I answer very diligently, every single question that any of my clients ever ask. And if I don't know the answer, I tell them I don't know the answer. But guess what? I have people that I can talk to. Here's two of them right here in front of me.
Yes.
and other people that I'm involved with that are much smarter than me. And I can be like, hey, I have a very unique problem. Do you mind if I bother you with it? And I will even pay other coaches for their time, or other mentors for their time, to figure that out for one of my clients. If I need to do that, I will absolutely do that. So it's one of those things where if your coach is very good, this is the type of conversations that you should be hearing from them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's all very well said.
And in the context of just life in general, like, this kind of leads into the whole abundancy versus scarcity mentality, because like me having the network that I do, and like associating with you guys, I'm confident in my own coaching abilities. I know I'm going to have clients. I know that I'm going to keep the people that want to be with me. But if I refer anybody to you guys, or if I don't have the answer to a question that a client brings to me, I know I'm confident that I can ask you guys, and I can ask you guys, I can ask anybody else that I've associated with, and I can get that knowledge to pass on to them, or I can send them to that individual to get that knowledge. And there's the whole abundancy versus scarcity thing. A person who is in a scarcity mindset, where they're kind of like, they're worried they're going to lose their client, or they're worried everybody's against them, and it's like me against the world, they would struggle with basically like being okay with their client going to another seminar, their client asking for advice from another coach. A big example of this is I do those video roasts on my Instagram story, and I ham it up. Like, the shtick is I am mean. So I'm more mean than I normally would be if it was a paying client. But I've had, I think the running tally right now is 5 coaches that have reached out to me, and they've been mad at me because I've talked to their client.
It should be the exact opposite, right? And like for example, I brought in Joe to Utah because I knew he knew things that I didn't know. And I don't know how many people I've referred over to David too, because again, like, hey, can you read this person's blood work, or go talk to David about this, because it's outside my realm. And it shouldn't be like this insecure, like, oh crap, like they're gonna think, we should be using each other as coaches and resources. like, this guy is just like, David knows things I don't know, Joe knows things I don't know, and vice versa. It's like we should use each other as resources. But now we're just getting onto another round, I guess.
Well, yeah, but that's what it is, it is a valid discussion, because there's so many. That's why I think like this podcast as a whole has so much potential to do a lot of good, and why I'm like, people have asked like me and Bree like how we want to change powerlifting and change sport, like whatever, and it's like, this is how we do it, because like it shouldn't be that like, okay, I need to worry about me and mine and fuck everybody else. It should be like the rising tide raises all ships. And if I had a client that went to a seminar, or like had a consultation with David, or worked with Jake on anything, and then they came to me and they were like, hey, this made sense because they presented it in this manner, or they answered a question that I wasn't capable of, like, what does that result in? It results in your client getting closer to the goal that you and they are working towards. And you should be fucking happy about that as a coach, if you actually give a damn about what you're doing.
Yeah, instead of getting offended about it too, it's like, hey, can so-and-so learn this from you? Can I pay you to teach me about this or whatever, and not get like upset about it, like, oh, this person's wrong. Just like, yeah, rising tide.
Yeah, for sure. And then just to kind of circle back and tie this whole together to an actual question that was asked was, when or how often should a lifter who is taking PEDs get blood work? Okay. And so all of this conversation kind of comes back to this. This is what I recommend for a power lifter that's competing about 2 times per year. Okay. A person that's competing twice a year, I think, should get 4 blood works. 1 immediately before or immediately after the first meet. Okay. And again at the second meet. And then in between those 2, where you are technically your healthiest. Okay. So let's just use Joe for an example, just so timeline, so everybody's kind of on board here. So Joe just competed in September. So he's already gotten his 1 blood work here, which was a week after or 2 weeks after. That's what I would consider peak dosage, peak stress. Okay. Then now he's starting to go into his off season. He's going to hopefully be running minimal drugs, bringing up aerobic capacity. When he feels that his aerobic capacity is about as good as it gets, as far as like, we're not going to hammer more aerobic work, we're actually going to start to transition out of that block into more building, like actual strength building. That's the point in time where he should be his healthiest, because you don't need a lot of drugs to elicit a lot of aerobic capacity. So that's when he should also be taking the least amount of drugs. So that is technically when he should be his healthiest. So that's the second blood work. Then he'll probably line up and start getting ready for the Kern or that second meet or something like that. So now his next blood work is already set. It's going to happen when he's at peak stress, which is going to happen whenever that second date is for that second meet. And then you repeat that, if you have enough time, for the second meet. So you'll have another point in time after the Kern where you are the most healthy. And that's where I would get your 4th blood work. So you're always checking the peak of stress and the
peak of health.
The peak of health. Exactly.
That might be a good place to kind of wrap this up.
I agree.
Honestly.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And to that point, on the side of training things, that is another thing that you have to think about when you're structuring your training plan, or when you and your coach are talking about structuring your training plan. You have to have these, even if it's not for certain, you have to have somewhat have dates in mind. Like, you have this meet, then this meet. It's the 2 meets per year, or like the 1 meet per year, or the potential thing off in the distance. And that's why, if you have a good coach, if you're an individual who structures your own training plan in a wise manner, you will have periods where you're not just pushing heavy squats, benches, and deadlifts. You're adding aerobic capacity. You're adding your ability to deal with the stress that is going to come with the hard training off in the distance. That's why I've had so many people ask me, like, why do you have people, why are your clients training so non-specifically? And I'm like, and it's because you can only get so technically proficient at a squat, bench, and deadlift. It's just up and down movement. It's not an extremely complicated movement. So if we could build up those things, then obviously do it. But it takes a bit of thought, and it's putting more accountability on the individual and on the coach. But if you structure your training plan around these dates, then you can also structure your blood work around these dates, and then you can put yourself in the best situation possible to be the best you can, which is ultimately the goal.
Yeah, maybe we should do a whole podcast just on off-season training and why we're doing what we're doing and how you set things up. Because there's a reason you don't see sprinters in their spikes in the block every single day year round. Like, they are only in their spikes for peak season, right? They don't get in them. They don't even run like for a good chunk of the season. So if you look at any other professional sport, Aaron Rodgers is throwing a football in the off season, right? Like, and that just kind of goes along with it, and we'll get into it more later. But yeah, well said.
And that is, I do want to have because my training is so different than what people see right now. I want to have an entire discussion dedicated to that, because I know if people that are like, oh, it's Joe Sullivan powerlifter. Like, if random people that follow me went to the gym today, they were like, why the fuck was Joe busting his ass so hard and killing himself doing sprints on the elliptical and then doing push-ups to failure? And that was a huge part
and
of his
doing
training.
box jumps.
And box jumps, exactly. So I really do want to. I really want to touch on a lot of the stuff that we're doing, but we talked about, I started a timer. We talked about making some of the episodes shorter. We're at 48 minutes.
Yeah,
so
cut it. We're done.
I don't know if we're ever going to succeed in that, but that's fine. So thank you guys, obviously, for the discussion yet again. And basically, just as in closing, because I was recommended to do this, we need to plug ourselves more, I guess. But David Herrera, you guys can find him on Instagram. He's building a website, going to be selling some of the products we mentioned on the first episode. He does do the consultation phone calls. He is a wealth of information, and I basically recommend everybody go over to him and at least set up a phone call consultation with him, because he's helped me extensively. I know he's helped Jake extensively. So that's David. Dave, you got anything to add?
So the website will be darylstrength.com. And that will be exclusively for the product. If you go there, it just says under construction, but when it goes live, everybody will get Instagram messages and all of that fun stuff. Hopefully before Thanksgiving, crossing my fingers, don't hold me to that, but it will definitely be before Christmas. And
how do you spell that?
DEREL strength.com.
Cool. Just
and we'll post that in the description and all that stuff too.
Yeah. And then as a plug, and I'm sure you're cool with this. Again, going back with everything that we've talked about, I have gained a lot of knowledge in all of this about periodization and where you put blood work and how you design drug protocols and all that type of stuff. From probably the person that's influenced me the most is Broderick Chavez, to the point where he has more or less allowed me to be kind of under his wing and have actual, I essentially get to interact with him whenever I want. And
if you actually go to Broderick's paid website, it's the Team Evo for anyone that doesn't know. David's actually got a really cool section on powerlifting. I think it's 5 episodes, right?
Yeah, it's five
really
episodes. Yeah, 5 episodes in depth, talking about all the concepts that we kind of finalized there at the end, where it's what Joe said about structuring your training, what Jake said about structuring where you put in your stressors and where you don't put in your stressors, and your blood work and your drugs and all of that for a whole year of my own training. And it's all laid out pretty professionally done.
It's 6 or 7 hours long. It's really in depth.
It's a 5 hour and a half long episodes. For anybody that wants to do that, you can pay $15 to Broderick. He really does deserve it. He's taught me a lot. I'm a self-learner, so I've been going to him just to his content and picking all this stuff up. But I do have interactions with him personally and all that type of stuff. So teamevilgsp.com for anybody that is interested in that. Very cheap if you want to get that information. And there's lots of other stuff on there talking about all the same stuff that we talk about here, but a different flavor of personality.
Yes. And Broderick, anyone that doesn't know Broderick, you gotta at least go look him up. He's one of the best. He's been doing it longer than I've been alive. He's really freaking good at what he does. He's worked on like every level of competition you can think of internationally. Way smarter than all of us.
Yeah, basically thirding that Broderick is an incredible wealth of information. I mean, and this is like I have only known him probably over the past like year plus a couple of months, just because of my friendship with Mike Israetel. And Mike has paid for his basically year-long consultation services consistently for 3 years. So it can recommend that incredibly.
Yeah. So that's my plug on myself, but where I have learned a lot of this stuff from personally. And if you guys want more of my specific content that I've put out for people to consume on PED use, that can be found there.
Yep. And Jake, plug yourself.
Jakey B on Instagram. So I have a lot more academic background, maybe more traditional academic background, but anyone that's a little bit more curious, and I think I probably mentioned this to both of you. I know I have to David at least. Anyone that really wants to dive into this, but maybe can't afford school or can't go to school, MIT actually has a really cool website, and it's opencourseware.mit.edu, and you can go through every chemistry class you can think of, undergrad, graduate, whatnot. So if you're really interested in hey, I really want to learn this and I want to be really good at this, and I do this all the time where I'll sit there for hours and go through extra courses and whatnot, or just relearn these things. But if you want to know that, go through and learn your basic biology. Open a textbook, go through the courses. They're really good courses. You can learn literally anything you want, and they're very well ran. So if you want the academic side, a lot of you probably don't, but that's where I got my knowledge, is just years and years and years of schooling and being a nerd and buying textbooks and reading them and stuff. But that's kind of mine. It's a little bit different. David's, kind of a little bit better, self-learner, been taught by someone that knows this stuff very well. And I have kind of the same thing, I guess, but with professors and more on the academic side, but maybe a little less practical application, if that makes sense. But I can tell you all the weird biochemistry,
that's valuable. It ties things together. That's what I like about it. That's why I like being able to ask you some questions about it, or even sometimes you even just mention shit before I even have to ask, and I'm like, oh shit, that's why it ties back to all of this other shit that I already know about.
It can be really fun because he's like, oh yeah, I knew it did that, but I didn't maybe know why or exactly how it happened or whatnot. And so we have these really weird conversations, and our wives just love us for it when we get together and talk about it.
Well, but to that point, literally Brianni is sitting over on the couch doing work, and there have been so many moments I've heard her mutter, "Oh, you guys are nerds." Because and that's fine. It's like that. Everybody here is Jake is a particular type of nerd. David is a particular type of nerd, and I am as well, because I got on my story earlier this week yelling about just buying a goddamn strength training anatomy book, because what's the fucking first thing that you can open when you read a goddamn book about this shit is oh, you go to, well, I'm not going to be able to find it, but you open this book and you go to the leg section, and then it's oh, femur length plays a role in torso angle when squatting. How do you bypass that? You put heels on. And it's whoa, crazy, wild, holy shit. And then there are so many people on the internet, they're I'm so bent over when I squat. How do I get around this? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like ankle mobility. How do you fucking bypass ankle mobility? Put goddamn heels on, for the love of fuck, or read a goddamn book that's $15 for fuck's sake. But yeah, that's, and then into that, I'm Joe Sullivan. You guys, I'm the guy that fucking, I'm the meathead amalgamation of Jake and David. It's basically like just me yelling about practical application and having conversations with Jake and David or David about like, oh, like mind muscle connection and like fucking this. And then Jake talks about like motor neuron activation and fucking dopamine deficiencies and acetylcholine fucking imbalances. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Well, that makes sense. And I'm like, so like if you get better at grinding weights and maintaining position after depleting your stored energy, i.e. glycogen, what does that do? Oh, it makes you better at grinding weights. Duh. No shit. Fuck. All right. Well, that makes sense.
You know that, but then it's just like
exactly. But then you actually you figure out the science behind it, and it's like, oh, cool, sweet. Now I know the mechanism. Now I can explain it to clients or individuals that ask in scientific terms, but then also be like, just don't be a pussy and fucking work really hard. And then it'd be like, you have 3 more reps. Don't be a bitch. Keep going.
And then I can take all of that and put it together and be like, how can we make that process better with some drugs?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then when we talk about my training right now, what I'm doing, we can talk about how I'm doing this type of training after this type of conditioning, all the while taking this drug at this time, this drug at this time, this drug at this time, and why when I come back to the platform in a year and a half, I'm gonna shit on all you motherfuckers. But that's neither here nor there. So, but as a whole, you got, it's Joe Sullivan AOD on Instagram. Fucking the VAODcollective.com is my website. I have my private Discord on there if you guys want to support all the shit that I have on my stuff and the education and this fucking podcast. Go sign up and give me or Jake or David and or all of our money or your money so that we can continue to pay rent and do shit like this
and eat and stuff.
Awesome. I love it, man.
All right, well, thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next week.